This is the Pacific Highway at Bulahdelah. It's the centre point of a stretch of road that recently has been dubbed the killing field because of the number of fatalities. To the north, the road winds through mountains. To the south, it's flat and open. Why then so many crashes? That's a question that's got everyone baffled. But when you look at the crashes, they involve one common denominator. That is, they involve drivers. And basically, care and concentration can compensate for anything that the road can throw up. In some ways the road presents a challenge, but it's not a challenge that drivers can't meet if they're sufficiently prepared.
The vehicle failed to negotiate the bend is an official description of many accidents, but almost always this really means a driver was found lacking both skill or concentration.
A lot of drivers are clearly frightened of bends, and that doesn't say much really, I guess, for their driving skill, because if you're frightened of something it means you don't know much about it. But you shouldn't be worried about corners if you think and apply yourself to it, like any other part of driving. And it's just really a case of having the car in the right place at the right time and using what road is available. A lot of people, first of all, start off by driving in an unbalanced way, a couple of hands on one side of the wheel, and that's no way to have control. The next thing, though, is to have confidence of where you're putting your car. To see, look ahead, read where the apex of the corner is, and look to the next corner. So that we've positioned the car here, so if there's anything on the inside, or if the corner happens to tighten up, we can come in smoothly. A lot of drivers do make the mistake of hugging the inside of the corner, and then it suddenly tightens up, or there's an obstruction on the inside, and they're in trouble. You notice this particularly in downhill corners. For some reason, drivers, I guess, through a little bit of fear, want to hug the inside.
If you turn into a bend too early, you make it much sharper than it need be, and you can find yourself running out of road on the exit. Even if you don't go over the centre line, you're badly positioned to take evasive action. See how a wider approach to the bend, turning in towards the apex only when you can see where the road goes, makes your cornering line smoother and safer.
The thing about cornering is that you've got to develop a constant think about it. It's not just a case of worrying about a corner on O'Sullivan's Gap or on Bulahdelah Mountain. You have to approach every corner the same way, even if it's just driving to work, and start to think about driving through that corner on the correct line. If you do that, of course, you don't get caught out, because sooner or later, if you just drive up the centre of the lane and just turn the wheel without much thought, sooner or later you're going to end up in a situation where you've just mistaken how tight the corner is, going a little bit too fast, and you're in trouble. It's that constant concentration, constant picking the line through the corner that gradually builds that automatic reaction for you and makes your driving so much safer through corners. South of Bulahdelah, the very fact that the road is featureless, flat, not really demanding, perhaps is its real danger. Drivers have had to concentrate harder than normal, perhaps through the mountains. They've had to concentrate through the tighter country south of here. Along here, they literally doze off. Not necessarily even going to sleep, but just forget about the task that they're involved in, and that's driving. There are lots of things to think about. Look, approaching this crest, really, I should be looking to the left to see where I could go if someone happened to be overtaking over the yellow line. No good waiting till it happens. Because a lot of the road is open too, there's a bit of a tendency to overtake in the wrong place. Surprising how quickly a car can be coming the other way. If both cars are travelling at 100, 110, then they can close very, very quickly.
Overtaking lanes can make driving safer, but many drivers are still reluctant to keep left when they're not overtaking. This can produce a mad scramble where the overtaking lane ends. But even if someone does do the wrong thing and block the overtaking lane, you shouldn't let impatience cloud your better judgment and lead you into a dangerous situation.
Because of the recent accidents on this stretch of road, I've heard some drivers say, knowing they were heading north, that they'd be taking particular care this time. But that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because whenever you're behind the wheel, whatever road you're using, anything less than 100% of care and concentration just isn't acceptable. We hear a lot today about the handling of cars, about good handling cars and cars that maybe don't handle quite so well. And certainly in terms of safety, handling is important, because what we're saying is that's the ability of a car to respond to a driver's demands, and in an emergency situation that can really mean the difference between avoiding a crash or going out of control and going off the road or into another vehicle or a pole or whatever. Now, most cars start off probably reasonable handlers these days, but all cars do deteriorate in the handling department. Certainly tyres are important, but a forgotten component is shock absorbers. This is a simple shock absorber, and all it is normally is filled with oil in here. This is a cutaway view, and it's the resistance of that piston going up and down that stops the spring of the car just continuing bouncing. Now, that's terribly important on a rough road or where you've got to swerve suddenly. Let's say around a parked car, something coming the other way, back again. Good shock absorbers really can mean the difference between life and death, but I wonder how many drivers really check them as often as they should. I'll show you what I mean with a little manoeuvre here. This might be chalk and cheese. That is a new Mercedes, this is an older Crown. But think of this as your new car, whatever it is, and think of this as your new car with a few years on and a few kilometres under its belt and the shock absorbers tied. And you can see the sort of difference when that handling counts.
Instead of witches' hats, these could be other cars or people I'm dodging. You can see how in an emergency you may need everything your car's suspension has going. Take another look at the shock absorber. Think how its resistance is the only thing controlling the suspension in those sudden swerves. Now the same exercise, same speed, just 50 kilometres an hour, and see how the lurch of soft shock absorbers catches me out. Try again. This time I can get through, but it is hard work. Take a close-up look at the work a shock absorber has to do, and it's not hard to understand why it gets tired. Every time a spring is compressed or stretched, it's the shock absorber's job to get it back under control again. In fact, in a modern car, the role of the shock absorber is more advanced. It's carefully engineered control, valves inside, which ensures that your wheels stay in contact with the road, no matter what the surface of the road or what the car's weight is doing. No matter how good your car is, shock absorbers, just like tyres, do wear out. And yet traffic authorities have never really made it mandatory that their condition be checked. So once again, it's a matter for the driver to be responsible. To check the Crown shock absorbers, we put the car on a special testing machine which bounces the suspension and then produces a graph which shows the condition of the shock absorbers. In fact, the shockers were nowhere near as tight as you may see on many bouncing around the roads. But typically the left-hand front had lost a deal of damping ability, and that does affect control.
Is that result fairly typical of a vehicle with a few kilometres under its belt?
It's very typical because the off-road edge of the road damages the left-hand shock absorber, which causes uneven braking.
Oh, I see. So one gets tired, and then when you brake, one side will dip more than the other.
And it's impossible to tell by bouncing on the car.
And no matter how careful you are, you never know when you're going to have to rely on your brakes or suspension to keep you out of trouble. That applies to every car. When you think how quickly a simple traffic situation can turn into an emergency, can turn into a crash, then tolerating a vehicle that's in anything less than its safest condition doesn't make much sense. That ability to stop or turn may be the only thing between you and a crash.
Obviously, you've got to match your driving to how well your car handles. But it never makes any sense to give away any safety margin at all. You may need everything that's going for you. It pays then to make sure that your suspension is maintained properly, and remember that you could end up in a situation where the only link between you and the road is a shock absorber.